the Town Council Finance Committee meeting. And we will take a roll call. And so, Maria?
Here.
Christina?
Here.
Mark?
Here.
Rich? Here. Penny? Oops, not here. And the other person missing is Robin, not here. So we've got 4 out of 6. Okay. So I thought what we'd do tonight, if we had some public, is we'd run the process a little differently. We've done this, and Todd, you may not know this, but we've done this a couple of years running now, where we've tried to get together and talk about what objectives the town council would have. We've had trouble getting any objectives down on the board. So I thought what we could do today actually is, if the public was here, I was going to ask each of them to stand up and give us 3 objectives that they had. So since we don't have any of those, then that's a problem. But I think what we should do with no public is, Todd, if you could give us a little introduction on what the Board of Finance would appreciate from the town council in terms of objectives.
Sure. Well, I would say that first, thanks for inviting us and hosting this. A couple thoughts for you. I think in previous years, the town council has asked for the opportunity to share their thoughts on guidance and provide that input to us. So we're certainly here to listen to what that might be, solicit your thoughts and input as we create that guidance. Chris and George and Michael are here. They are our group that puts together the thinking, the modeling, and so forth, have now for 2 years running. This is their 3rd. And while they have a lot of fun doing it, I think we're on borrowed time since it's nights and weekends. But in any event, they'll be putting together our modeling and some of the scenarios and some of the parameters as we go through our thinking for the year that will begin next July 1st. Just a few maybe highlights. As you know, we had back-to-back years of below budget spending these last 2 years. As you also know, and you saw that report in the Advertiser last week, the debt has been declining now steadily. We've been working on that and is now down, after this October payment that we'll make, we'll be down around 102 million. We think that's about the lowest in 20 years. Now we're building up some demand for some debt for some things, and of course rates are low. So, but debt is always part of the equation, part of the calculus in terms of our guidance that we think about, and the debt payment that we put down on a fixed basis we pay every year is an important line item in our annual budget. So it's something that we do want to watch, and we continue to like to reduce it to the extent that we can. We've also required less tax revenues from the taxpayers 2 years in a row. We think that's a first, and so we're pleased with that sort of thing. That's really the careful spending and the planning that we've all done and work through your work, the town council's work, and the work the Board of Finance has done. I think, as you know, 70+% of the spend every year is police, fire, and schools. And so that's where a lot of the budget money goes. And so we're right now, as always, focused on our top priorities, but looking for some creativity and some suggestions around things we might do. The priorities continue to be great schools. I think we all agree with that. At some level or another, we want to be a leading school district. We really want to continue to support a beautiful downtown and all the things that we have around programs and parks and so forth. Provide safety, of course, and then maintain the financial health of the town. And we know there are always uncertainty in the state of Connecticut, given the financial dire straits that the state's in. I know it had a big rainy day fund fine. $2 billion is nice, but $68 billion of unfunded liabilities is a pretty big counterweight to that. So we know there are issues, and we've got to make sure we keep our powder dry for any negative surprises that might come our way from the town, from the state to the town. So that's always something that we have in the back of our minds as we do our planning and our thinking. Health costs, obviously a variable. COVID expenses and uncertainty, always variable. So those are all the things we live with, you work with, and you are doing the exact same things on your end as well. So with that as a bit of a backdrop, we're just trying to put together some ideas around what guidance and some scenarios might play out around spending, potential taxes and so forth, and a couple of ideas that our team has thought about. And actually one that came up in the last meeting that we had jointly at Waveney, at Lapham, back in December, and that is, should we have multi-year guidance? Is that something we ought to be putting on the table to help the town bodies plan better? It's one thing to say you need to cut your spending 2%, or you need to be flat, or you need to do this. And within a year, you only have so many levers. But if we said, over 3 years, here's an idea, here's a framework, here is a range of spending, that might make it easier for the various town bodies to think more thoughtfully and strategically around how they might manage their spending. So I'll stop. I just give you that little context and backdrop. And again, appreciate the opportunity to get to input as we get into
Todd, thank you.
One quick question. Anything else that Michael or George or Chris want to add?
No, I think this is really good, especially if we could get more of a cohesive view between the town council and board of finance. That might lead to less exhausting budget presentations over and over and over again by each of the departments and the school board, which is, detracts from their ability to run their organizations and is pretty exhausting for everybody involved.
No, I think I agree with George and Todd. It's just helpful for us to understand what the priorities, the goals are from the town council. We obviously are having conversations with the town as well as the BOE shortly on their goals and priorities. So I think this will be interesting for us to hear what you have to say and we learn from it.
When is your objective on getting the budget letter out? On actually sending it?
Michael?
Well, what are our thoughts? We're looking to have a conversation about it this Board of Finance meeting, right? George and Chris.
Yep.
And shortly after that, I would say, right? So my guess is maybe, a couple weeks after that, which would be the end of October.
Yes, I was thinking either end of October, first week in November at the latest.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me just go through my thoughts for a minute. And James, welcome. You are the public here, and just so we are going to have some public comments. And what I'm actually going to request of you as the public commenter is we're trying to put together a list of budget objectives for the town council to assess and get behind. We're not going to make any decisions tonight, obviously, but we want to be able to have a discussion on budget objectives in the next town council meeting, which I believe is a week from today. No, 2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from 2 weeks.
2 weeks from today. And so in the hopes of getting some good input, et cetera, what I'd appreciate you doing is giving, and I'm going to ask everybody here except the guys from the Board of Finance that are exempt from this, is to throw up at least 3 budget objectives. They could be repetitive of what other people say, but I would like to just throw those up and not discuss them and come back and discuss them after we've thrown them all up. And so, you ought to be able to think about that for a while, or for a few minutes anyways. And so I'll just introduce us a little further and then we'll come back to that. One of the things I wanted to say is, since my time being on the town council, which this is the 3rd budget cycle, I think one of the most effective vehicles in the budget cycle is this letter. I believe that this has had more impact on the discussions that take place, on the actual outcome, et cetera, than just about anything else. And it kind of is the compass that everyone kind of keeps coming back to. And so I think this is a very, very important letter in my mind. And if I could I went back and reviewed it, and I just wanted to point out what were the objectives in the letter last year. And let me just read it. We believe these guidelines will help ensure the town of New Canaan continues to honor its traditional objectives of providing an attractive and safe environment for our residents, delivering unquestioned excellence in education for our children, and maintaining commitment to fiscal responsibility. And so that's I think the 4th paragraph. So just an example of what some objectives may be. They could be more specific than that or less specific than that. And then if I skip down to the next paragraph, it says process and objectives. And the last sentence in the 1st paragraph says, recognizing these challenges and reflecting the underlying goal of a controlled spending dynamic, the board adopted a requirement that 2021's mill rate must be lower than 2019 and 2020, and it was. So I think that's pretty darn good. And so I just think this letter is an extremely good place to start and a good place to go. If I could kind of I asked the people that didn't show up tonight, like Penny and Robin, because they're busy. I asked for some input. I unfortunately didn't get any. So I don't have input from them, but I did get the input from Mark and Tom. So Mark and Tom, if you wouldn't mind starting off with your input. Either one.
Yeah. Well, I'll let the notes that we kind of jotted down speak for themselves. But I kind of want to start off by touching on a comment Todd made, or at least dive into it a little bit more, because I think it's interesting, Todd, and that being giving 3-year guidance versus or adding 3-year guidance, and maybe even not using that 3-year guidance instead of giving 1-year guidance, because things change, and as we've seen this year, the dynamics change on a 1-year basis. So giving 3-year guidance may be more helpful, I think, for institutions in terms, or departments, is the way they're planning on a year-to-year basis. And then, the way I view it is, from an objective standpoint, is, and I think it's sort of spelled out in the letter last year, is the town has, through the survey, given us what they expect from us and from the town. And so long as we're meeting those objectives, then I'm happy to give guidance. I think when we do a top-down guidance, I get a little bit concerned. I prefer, I think most organizations work from the bottom up. So I just want to, as long as there's not a conflict of interest, then, or a conflict within the way these people are budgeting, and we're not overly influencing them, then I find it to be very helpful. I'd probably be more supportive of giving 3-year guidance, Todd, then I think that's a great idea, just for the record. I think we all do that, in generally speaking. So, and given the current environment, how things change, how we like to forecast things, and it never plans out as is, then I think it's more impactful too. So, and I think I'll start there. I'll have more to say, but maybe just kind of not.
It's early days on this. If I can respond, not respond, but just maybe continue the discussion on it. I think if we're going to ask people to have flat or lower budgets, you got to give them 3 years to figure it out. I think to do it in a year is hard and can be dysfunctional. I think that was maybe the premise of the idea, but it could bring a budget discipline to our town that's easier to implement because you're giving them time to do it. I guess that was kind of the core thinking around it. But things come up too, so we have to have contingency planning maybe at another level. But anyway, I appreciate that. We're just thinking about it now, and we're gonna look at it hard.
Okay. Anybody else want to volunteer? If not, I will go. But John, would you like to volunteer?
Well, I happen to be looking at last year's letter, and I just think it, and I'm wondering, so is this what we're talking about? Because it helps me understand sort of what you mean when you say the word guidance. So let me see if I can find the letter. Share screen. I think you sent this email last year. Wait, I gotta find it.
The one that was published in the budget book was December 2019 was the date on it.
3 town council budget objectives, 2020, 2021. And they were goal, affordability, benchmarking, and part of a long-term plan and strategy. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
Is that what your objective is tonight, is to get to something like that?
Well, I think something like that is very useful, but that's pretty global, right? I mean, that doesn't kind of get down into the numbers of it. You know what I mean?
You see it now on the screen?
I do.
All right, so this is the document I got, and it said goal. We want to see, affordability, benchmarking. I guess what I wanted to focus on, because it just came up, is part of a long-term plan and strategy. We would like to understand our spending plan in the context of where we are going as a town over the next several years. I think I hear that being echoed again tonight. as one of the most important things we could be doing is thinking 3 years out. Investments that we should, the return that we anticipate in the future is measured by making us a more attractive choice for people considering moving into or out of our town. What's interesting about that statement versus last year is people are moving into and out of our town, perhaps for different reasons than they were a year ago. And so, you know, that's interesting as well. I guess I'll just point out a couple things. The importance of long-term planning. For many years, this town starved its road budget in the interest of being fiscally prudent and fiscally responsible. We starved our road budget, and it was a bad long-term strategy. But it looked good because we were cutting our road budget cutting our budget every year. Same thing happened over at the country club. They spent $900,000 on their golf course every year. Woodway spends about $1.5 million. Weburn does too. And after 10 years of this, everybody at the country club complained about the level of service and the condition of the golf course and said, you need to start spending, to make us competitive with the other clubs around us. So I wonder if we're telling our Board of Finance, and our Board of Finance is telling our schools and our departments to cut and be flat, but whether there are any particular services like road or growing of grass that are going to come back and bite us. So I guess that's what I would add.
Okay, well, I appreciate you bringing that letter up, John. But as I go through mine here, mine is not particularly inconsistent with that. When I wrote down objectives, I wrote 4 objectives down. The first one I wrote down was spending is assessed to be efficient. And this gets back to the notion that I think all of us spend a lot of time going through details of the plan, the budgets in all the departments we request. And the main objective of that is to understand if we are spending money well or not. And if we're not spending money well, then at least at the gross level, which is where we get to approve the total, if we're not spending well, we ought to be cutting it. If we're not providing the services we should provide, we ought to be taking it up, but still spending efficiently. And so I think it's incumbent upon the process, and I think the Board of Finance is the place to start, quite frankly, is making an assessment. Do we think we're efficient? If we're not efficient, where are we not efficient? And we ought to fix that. The second one I had, and it gets back to the 3 years, is I think spending should be limited to growth with inflation, assessed looking back 3 years and forward 3 years. And I think it should be looking forward as well as back, because if you go on a whole 1 year, you should be able to help fix it the next couple of years. And know that as you're going into things like your contract negotiations, et cetera, when it's coming up. We had a bad couple of years. We got to get this back to where it should be. And so I would say I think that is a very good goal. But on top of that goal, I believe our objective should be to provide the infrastructure the town wants. And if the town needs additional infrastructure that will taking up kind of a step function, I think we should do it. And I think those are very hard to agree to. I think there are ones that should be considered very, very well. But stuff like we need a new high school, we should be able to decide that. Maybe it takes our spending up 10% or whatever. But it ought to be different and not told to be stuck into an inflation adjusted spend rate. So that's just my thought. I think that the mill rate, and that's not the spending, that is a mill rate, needs to be competitive with our peer towns over a 3-year look back and 3-year look forward. I just think that's a good competitive measure that we should have. And then the last thing I would say is I would like a goal that says we have a valid 5-year capital plan that keeps our bonding within the guidelines. I really want a capital plan where we look at it and it's really serious about what we think we're going to do. And if it adds to too much money because we told everybody to put whatever it is, then we take a bottom line cut out of it. We say over the next 5 years, you got to figure out how to take out 10 million or 20 million or 30 million. But I think that we should be serious in a longer term plan going forward, both in capital as well as spending. So those were my 4. And John, I don't think they're very different actually than the letter you brought up there.
Yeah, Rich, I heard the 4 correctly. The first was spending money efficiently, right? Second is spending for our infrastructure. Third is our mill rates competitive. And fourth is the capital plan 5 years.
Right.
Okay. I just want to make sure those are the 4.
Yeah. Right. And so, well, that doesn't lay any numbers out. It lays a basis on which we could put numbers together.
What was number 4? I'm putting them in the chat window.
For a 5-year capital plan.
Okay.
And
That
had
keeps-
bonding.
I say
within
that keeps
guidelines.
within our bonding guidelines.
Yeah, yeah. I thought I heard you say something about keeping spending consistent with inflation.
I did.
Only,
Three-year
Let me
three-year
read
look
it
back and a 3-year
Yeah.
look forward in terms of operating expense growth, not, but excluding capital needs, if I understood it correctly.
Excluding unique needs. I mean, let's say we decided
Okay.
we wanted to put a bus transportation system in place. That was a service the town has decided they want to do. You couldn't expect to put that into
Yeah, right.
an inflation-adjusted spend rate.
and I agree with all that. That's fine. The only question I might have, though, it does assume that the base spending number you're working offering is an efficiently driven number. So you're
That's
assuming
why-
things are efficient. You see, you know what I'm saying? That's
That's
the
why it's
one.
number one.
Yeah, you got to just, yeah, good.
That's why it's number one. And if you say it's not efficient and it's a $2 million inefficient, we ought to cut it $2 million.
But yeah, I agree, Rich, with your points. I think the word that I have a trouble with is efficient versus effective. People of this town want things to be, the results speak for themselves. So we always want to be efficient. I mean, I think that goes without saying. But if the roads are not, as John pointed out, are a disaster, then our spending isn't effective. And I would say the same thing if our results, from looking at the school system, if we were subpar, then yeah, we're not being effective by the way we're spending our money. So I think I agree with you. I just think I hate the word efficient when we're, it's great when we're producing something at a plant, but I don't know. I think effective is what the town wants, and that the survey says they want things to be effective.
I think that's a very good word, and that gets into when you say the mill rate should be competitive. But all the towns have very unique environments, right? That require different infrastructures. Darien's got a beach. We've got a 200-acre park. We've got 200 miles of road. Darien's got 40. There's all these things that figure into the different cost of living there. And it is hard to assess and say, should ours be higher or lower than theirs? That's why I didn't say numerically it should be the same. I just said it should be competitive. But I take your point. I think that's good. Anybody else want to weigh in here? Maria?
I think if anything, you have to keep both words in there, effective and efficient, because no one wants to, spend needlessly. So I think it's good. A lot of people want to see that we are being efficient. Just because we paid for something last year doesn't mean we need it again this year. That's what I would like to see. You can't have everything. If you bring in something new, what is it replacing? Or is it all necessary? I think it's important to make a judgment call on that. Just like in our own home budgets, we don't, continuously buy additional cars. We replace one with another. We're efficient. We do better the next time around while we're still performing well. So I like the word efficient.
Okay. I got it. I understand. I think it's important, and I put this in some of these notes that I've sent over to the Board of Finance before, that says, but this isn't objective. I'd like to see a list of here's where we save money, and here's where we're spending it. Here's where we're investing, and here's where we're saving within that spending line.
And Rich, maybe this is also going back to the letter, Todd, and curious, maybe a discussion on this would be helpful. When we talk about fiscal responsibility, which is obviously very important, when we're looking at debt and, fiscal responsibility is also, pretty vague to me in terms of, how we're trying to define it. I'm wondering if we could be a little bit more, put a little bit more meat to just saying fiscal responsibility. In the case of, say, debt, I mean, what is the proper amount of debt that the town of New Canaan can handle in the current interest rate environment? I mean, just maybe a little bit more. I know you wouldn't put that in a letter, but I think among us, we should be, it should be a little bit more clear because as relatively new to this body, I've never been able to understand, and working in capital markets, I'm sort of confused as to like, well, how much leverage is the town capable of and should we be running with? So anyway.
Well, that's good input, and we have those numbers and we can add them to beat that specificity that I think is good.
And we do have a debt management guideline that the board put together 2 years ago and was reviewed again this year, and no changes were made to it, but it doesn't mean changes can't be made to it. So, and that's a document you can get.
And also to follow up on Chris's or Mark's concerns is, if you look at the state guidelines for the amount of debt that a town like New Canaan could have, it's insane.
Yeah.
Okay. It is
Of course.
exponentially higher than what we currently have or we would ever agree to bear. But the other good anchor to Wynwood on this, of course, is every time we go to the market, we have to meet with bond counsel. We have to meet with the underwriters. And we got to meet with the guys who sell this stuff. And I remember a couple of years ago meeting with them. And at the time when we were first starting to get a little concerned and starting to focus on total outstanding obligations in terms of general obligations, and I can't remember who it was, but I think it was one of the rating agency guys said, listen, if there was a quadruple A rating, we'd give it to New Canaan. So it's really not not primarily, the thing that drives our bond outstanding is not primarily a concern about our ability to pay. I think it's more a concern of what seems to be an appropriate spend, as Rich was saying, efficient and effective kind of use of taxpayer funds.
No, that's fair. I understanding, how we get to a certain level and why, and also long term. And I know you guys have done that, but I just think it's worth exploring. At least from my standpoint, as to what's appropriate right now, given what we have on our plate right now. And it's I feel like sometimes we're constrained by it, but anyway.
For this year's letter, I think Linda reported last week that we have $29 million in the bank, and I seem to remember we had a target of 20 to 25 and we have 29. Where are we relative to our target right now?
Above it. Well, above in the 20 to 25?
We have 29 in the bank. I don't know where what we should have.
Yeah, just to make sure, again, it comes down to some benchmarks. Let me make a comment about the debt and then I'll answer that question. On the debt, keep a couple things. There's the absolute amount of debt. That's a number. You can compare it to other towns. It's not relevant in a vacuum. And I'll explain why in a second. The second point is, really more important, it's the amount of annual debt expense we want to have, because that's directly tied to how much we're going to ask taxpayers to pay. So that gets very relevant, not so much the aggregate number. Look, this is a town that in the last year where we've got the data, we had $2.4 billion of income from the residents of this town, and we have $100 million of debt. It's de minimis. The grand list is $7.7 billion. So $7.7 billion to have $100 million, of assets and $100 million of debt is silly. So the total amount is not relevant, but we do worry about that annual expense. But anyway, I take the point, which is like spelling that out and having that as benchmarks tied to the fiscal responsibility point is an excellent. We will do that. As it relates to the general fund, to the unconstrained general fund, we want to have something in the 15 to 20% of the budget in that fund, not pure dollar amount. It's a percentage of the budget. Most towns like us hold about 18 to 14. I did a benchmark against all the towns you'd want to benchmark against, from Darien to Greenwich to, I picked up Stamford. I picked up Farmington, West Hartford, reasonably, financially run well towns. We're still on the high end of our benchmark. We're not either the highest or the second highest as it relates to the percentage of our budget, partly driven by the fact that we have more in there than we expected because we've underspent our budget 2 years in a row, and we've contributed to the general fund, even though we gave $4 million back this year to the taxpayers. So we're targeting a percentage partly driven, as George said, by the bond rating agencies. They will want to see a certain amount in that fund to guarantee our AAA, although that's really is not as relevant as some of those other metrics that I said, and partly to make sure we've got dry powder for unforeseen, as you know. So in that, I would say 15-18% of our annual expense is really what our target is.
So for the non-professionals in the room who are going to read this in the paper, what they really want to know is whether you're going to take that money and you're going to spend it on additional capital, because that's where the need is, or additional services, or you're going to return it to taxpayers.
Yeah, all of the above. I think that's literally what we've done, try to do that prudently. We'd rather every year we know a little bit more about what we will expect. And Michael did a detailed analysis on this. And it's important that we, again, keep a certain amount. We will work off a certain amount, partly because I think, as you know, we had the Board of Ed underspent their budget. I don't know that they're going to underspend it this year. So we've got a couple of little windfalls that we had over the last few years. We earned more money than we expected, things like this. And every year we evaluate it. We do the math, and George and Chris, great job calculating where we'll be under these scenarios so that we end up with two things. One, not just the year's number, but we want to make sure we don't cut it too close if we expect an uptick in health expenses or something else that could be coming down the pipe the next year that could wipe out, they could take 28 million to 21 quickly. So we've got to be very careful in that regard. So we do look at this pretty scientifically, but every year now, the last couple of years, we've given, I think we gave 4 million back, or 3.5 the last year, or 4.5 this year. So we'll continue to probably sort on giving it back to taxpayers first, then using it instead of debt, if we'd like. Although, as been said, the rates are so low, it's very tough not to go ahead and just borrow the money for some of these items. But again, we're trying to watch the overall debt expense. Chris, George, and Michael, anything you want to add there? You guys work on that in great detail.
Yeah, no, I just want to add one comment, Todd, which is the year-to-year adjustments that have to come into play. And as you all remember, there was a one-time health saving from Board of Ed. That was great last year. But because it's a one-time savings, there's a double whammy for this coming year where you don't get the savings this year. So on a year-to-year basis, it looks twice as bad. So if you don't have the savings, the healthcare expenses for Board of Ed goes up 31%. And then if you just assume 3% for operating expenses for everyone else, as a status quo, if you just grow everyone's expense 3%, the overall budget would have to go up 5.5% because of the healthcare adjustment. So then the question is, do we subsidize this 5.5% with our general fund to take it back down to 3%? And is that the best use of the general fund? It might be. Or it might be that we say, look, we can't afford 5.5% budget growth overall. So all of you have to find a way to cut your operating expenses more, right, as a question. So those are the questions we have to understand. But I wouldn't do that in a vacuum. I would do that to understand what the school priorities are, what Kevin and the town's priorities are, and then have a discussion is, should we use this general fund of money to give back to taxpayers, to use that to reduce the growth year to year so our mill rate can still be competitive, like you say, Richard, without having, and still be able to do the things we want to do for our infrastructure.
That's the calculus.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's very interesting. My reaction to that is, yeah, if unfortunately we're a year where the needs of each department didn't got us to that number, yeah, I think that's exactly what the general fund is there for. Yeah, and I would agree with you.
Great.
I think the three-year issue, Michael, looking back and looking forward, starts to take that into effect, because we had a very good year this year that was way under inflation as a result of that. That would offset part of that going forward. And you say, that's just the way it is. And then going forward, and then that's why I would want to look forward 3 more years. So you look at those 3 years, then you look forward, you say, now what has to happen in the next 3 years to make this 5 look right in the context of the whole 6 years? And you say, oh my God, we have contract negotiations coming up, et cetera, blah, 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 that we need to be cognizant of, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, I love the 3-year even more now.
George or Chris, any other thoughts?
No, I think
go ahead, George.
No, I was just going to say, I think, Michael, as Chris and you and I have talked, that's exactly what the general fund is for. It's in fact, we know we're going to have, or the Board of Ed is going to have a very, very tough time trying to come in with a reasonable increase in their operating costs because of the negative variance from budget from last year. That's going to some degree, have to be addressed by an additional drawdown on the general fund, because one of the objectives we have, as Todd and Rich and John have all said, is we have to maintain the excellence of the school system. So we're going to have to come up with that money. The other thing that I've always had in the back of my mind, and I know Chris has as well, is, as Todd said, we live in a really nice house in New Canaan in a really bad neighborhood, which is Connecticut. So at some point, the people in Hartford are going to figure out that the ability to pay is not equally distributed across the state. And there seems to be some untapped money in the ATM in Lower Fairfield County. At some point, if they do that, even a modest shift in the way we fund any of the state obligations would drop a huge number on New Canaan taxpayers. And we're going to need to have a certain kind of cushion in order to be able to ameliorate the impact of that over a 2 or 3 year period. And that's always been in the back of my mind as to why I like a larger, why I'm closer to Todd's 18% than I am to, say, I think Stanford is at 14.
But isn't it because we have so much cash available that we become a bigger target? I would rather return it to return it to the shareholders. We have a tremendous ability to borrow if they throw a curveball at us at low rates. If they throw a curveball at us, I like the model Greenwich, which is a pay-as-you-go model. They don't keep a big stash of cash available, and they don't take on a whole lot of debt.
Right. Well, because Greenwich is a slightly different demographic and socioeconomic profile than New Canaan. So they may have a slightly more flexible kind of ability to fund. The problem with saying, well, we could just bond it, is a lot of the costs that would be dropped on New Canaan from Hartford are operating costs and would not be able,
Bondable.
it would be illegal to bond.
Yeah.
So those are things that I think we should all kind of think about.
You can't bond operating.
George, let me ask you a question. On the other on the other side of that, if we got some big bill from the state that they were going to reallocate teacher pensions or something going forward, I mean, the appropriate way to actually fix that is you got to increase taxes because that's a going forward issue, right? I mean, if it's a one-time issue, it's one thing, but if it's a going forward issue, there's no reason, and I believe you folks have the ability to raise taxes in the middle of the year if there's some catastrophe like this. And so having a huge amount of money sitting around waiting for a catastrophe, I'd rather have my citizens holding it and saying, but if a catastrophe comes, we're going to pay it.
Rich, let me maybe take a second on what we're talking about here. The bonding agencies for AAA borderline require 10% of your budget. Okay, that's $15 million for the town of New Canaan. That's kind of our floor.
Yep.
Okay, we have 28. So we have a little bit of room to play with here, of which we expect we'd be giving some to the taxpayers, and we, as Michael just walked you through, might have a one-time hit here with it. We could be at 21 very quickly. There's not a lot left to play with, so it's not like it's the difference between 29 and 0.
Okay.
To your point on the pensions, the whatever little bit of extra dry powder we have isn't going to come close to funding whatever they might send our way. So I want to be careful. Let's make sure we have the right perspective on how much money we're actually really.
Well,
I really got $138 million budget times 18% gets me to 24,000,008, and we have 29. So I think Rich and I are just talking about the last 5 million, returning 5 million back to the taxpayers. That gets you down to George's 18%. And
which is what we did. Yeah, we did that.
Guidance says that 14% is okay, and
Yeah, but,
10% is okay.
We did
Yeah, but John,
$4.5 million. We just did $4.5 million this year, and I would expect if we can, depending on how things end up throughout the year, we're getting no parking, fees, as you know. There's quite a few revenue streams that are dried up. Conveyance fees are going the other way. So we'll see. But our tradition for years has been to give $2, $3, $4 million every year right back and pay off the expenses, and which pays down the mill rate. We plan on doing the exact same thing. If you give it
Yeah,
away
what-
one more time, we could give away 8, but then we got nothing left.
All right, but I'm also looking, I'm
Hold on.
looking at the fiscal year 2021 town council approved numbers from Lunda, and that says total budget's 152 million.
Yeah, it's
So
not
that's 15
138.
million plus, if you want to do 15%, that's 15 plus 7, that's 22. The 4.5 we usually give back to the taxpayers, that takes us up to 26. And we're at 27 or 29, I can't remember. So I don't think.
The
we're
input,
taking
let's
on a
not debate
huge-
it.
I don't think we're gonna solve it here, but I think it is
Got your
something
input.
that I think the town council would like would like to give you some input on it.
You got it.
I would much rather we were running between 15 and 20 than running between 25 and 30.
You're talking about
And give
millions
that
of
10
dollars
back
now.
to the people.
You mean dollars or you
You're
mean?
talking about dollars now.
Dollars, 20, between 15 and 20 million of a rainy day
Yeah,
fund
but okay,
versus 25 to 30.
Can I just say something?
Okay, so as long as the citizens realize that 1 year, when you give them back $5 or $6 million, that's the one and only year they're going to see that.
But let's not debate it,
Just
Chris.
like, just
Yeah,
like.
we're not gonna solve it. We're not gonna
input.
solve it here.
Good
But can I
input.
bring up another objective?
Can I just say one thing before we get off the topic? I just want to explain the math so everyone understands. It's a little confusing. We gave 4.5 million last year, right? So if you want to keep on par this year, we got to give 4.5. I just talked about the BOE healthcare issue, which is about a $5 million problem. So if you solve that $5 million problem, you got to take another $5 million out of general fund. We are at 9.5 million out of the 29. So we're down to 19.5 without using the general fund for anything else.
And you're still 4 ahead of where you need to be.
Okay, let's not debate it. We got your input. Got it. Good input.
Your
I'm just
math is
saying-
wrong.
Right. I'm just saying this before we do anything else, we'll be at 19.5.
We will include it in our analysis, guys, as our guidance. In the
Okay, can I bring up another topic and another objective? I think an objective ought to be taking another serious look and another serious attempt at monetizing some of the assets in town. I think we've got these buildings that are empty, that have been empty forever, and they do cause maintenance expense. I think we need to figure out how to get the Board of Ed out of rental space. I think we've got space everywhere that is unused. And I don't know how we accelerate that. Ever since I've been on the town council, we've been talking about this. And the only thing that's happened is we moved 2 departments into the old out back.
Okay, agreed. I know Kevin's looking at a lot of things. It's definitely on the list, but the plan is what I think we need a little more specificity on and some action. So, good.
Well, I think if we actually plan the capital the way we think we need to, we can use selling stuff as a source rather than saying we're going to keep everything we got. And we need the police department, and we need new this and new that, and new fire truck. And I think we should have an objective to reduce the assets in town.
Maybe this is a way to bring Tom into the conversation, but I guess my question is on mill rate. Why are we so fixated on having to reduce it every year? Rich, that's probably a question for you.
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question.
I mean, if it's
I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer to it, but it tends to be, I think, the measurement metric for fiscal responsibility.
by who? No one's buying a house and looking at their mill rate.
It's not true.
That's not true.
It's just not true. We don't get a lot of metrics, but it's one of the only metrics that sits on a listing sheet.
Well, what's on the listing sheet is the dollar amount of the taxes.
Taxes.
The mill rate's on it.
That's why.
Mill rate's an irrelevant number to the home buyer.
Yeah.
The taxes they're paying are and what they're getting.
For a number of years, we tried to say the target is the amount to be raised from taxation and not worry about the mill rate. And so what you want to do is try to control that number. And we've been pretty successful over the past few years of keeping it, relatively flat. And it's turned out to have a corresponding effect on the mill rate, but that's somewhat coincidental.
But
Some of us who pay attention to the mill rate applaud your efforts to keep focus on the mill rate. For some of us, it's important.
Yeah.
But in reality, we're basing what we're collecting in taxes at a lower rate than we're actually collecting, and that's where the excess comes in. So if we give it back, we're just doing a math back and forth. We're then adjusting it to the proper number eventually. But I thought that we're collecting that excess not only to build up the rainy fund, but also to gauge in times like this whether or not most taxpayers are going to pay their taxes. And there was a lot of uncertainty. So that money that we're giving back, it's basically an adjustment at the 11th hour.
Well, it's only about $1.4 million that we collect to build in the fund, and we gave back 4.5. So
See, that's a listing sheet, and right there, 18.16, right there. So every realtor gets to look at that every time. You see the property tax 23, mill rate 18, assessed value 13. It's out there. It's how we get evaluated versus Darien every day.
I agree. Well, I agree that it's on the sheet. I disagree in that the mill rate is the driving factor behind. It's the value, the price of the home and the taxes that you're paying on that house, and what are you getting for it in return? I mean,
But when I need
the actual mill rate to me is irrelevant.
But when Rich started the whole conversation with what metrics do we use to evaluate whether we are competitive with the towns around us, it is one of those numbers that every town must have and becomes, rightly or wrongly, a metric that people look at. Rightly or wrongly, we look at it.
I understand that, John. I just don't think that that is the metric by which the people in this town are paying attention to as much as you think. If schools declined and you kept the education in this town went down and the mill rate went down, you're happy, but
Nobody else is.
No, I'm just saying it's a
so the mill rate doesn't.
We're doing towns with school systems like Darien. It's a proxy. And when Wilton says we have a great school system too, but our mill rate is 5 points higher, it's a problem for them.
Wilton's is 28. It's 10 points higher.
See, they suck.
But that goes back to, John, you're in real estate. That what are you getting for this? For if $1 million home in this town versus $1 million town in Milburn, New Jersey, or the best school systems in Long Island, where you're paying $30,000 for the same square footage and the house is older and smaller, the mill rate's irrelevant. Tell me what I'm getting for $1 million and what those taxes are to put my kids to the school system. So the mill rate, I think, is confusing. I'm pretty sure.
Well, it's also, you got to keep in mind, it's very much driven by the grand list value. I mean, Westport's mill rate is 16.8, but their grand list is 11.5 billion. Ours is 7.7. So I think you got to keep a few of those things that drive that number. I agree with the 100% perspective, and it matters to how much you pay for taxes. But one thing we could be talking about instead of the mill rate, which is an outcome, is how do we get the value of our grand list higher? Are there things that could be done around that? Both not only the reval was more of a driver of the mill rate than the behaviors.
Go ahead, John.
I want to share one more screen since, and I promise there's no mill rate on it, but this is the current numbers for house sales in New Canaan. So this is the New Canaan, this is in September. And I just want to show you a look back to 2013. You can see that the current number of sales, 231, is the best it's been in 10 years. You can see by how much.
So the grand list is going up, John.
Yeah, but the grand list
hold on.
The mill rate went up, John. So that just tells we should raise the mill rate more.
Hold on. So house and condo dollar volume of closings first 8 months is up 51% this year. So I just want to kind of point that out because the purpose of this meeting is the guidance letter and the planning.
Right.
I'm just trying to show you the best data I have, without editorial. This is the best data I have on how the New Canaan market is doing. I know that our and Linda has said that, our house sales are way ahead of where they were last year, and therefore his collections are way ahead.
I have to tell you guys, I think that's a direct connection between the quality of the schools and the value you get for the house and the taxes you paid vis-a-vis other choices. That's all work that's been done by these bodies and people before us for 20 years that got us into a position to take advantage of this situation.
I agree. Nobody disputes that.
Use a different metric. Use dollars per square foot that you pay in Darien versus pay in New Canaan, and we're like 25 to 30% cheaper than Darien on a dollar per square foot basis.
It's like looking at the amount of debt. It's in the context of, without other context, it's not a useful number.
And quite frankly, it's one of the reasons I live here, because when I looked in Darien 30 years ago, it was no different. You walked into a New Canaan house, it was spacious. You walked into a Darien house, it was, for the same price, it was 30% smaller.
Yeah, and also, and you're, it's also important to look at the other states around us that are no better off fiscally from a state standpoint, New Jersey, and taxes to get into the best school systems in New Jersey, you're paying exorbitantly more in taxes. So I do think the fixation on mill rate is just not. I've never been a huge fan of it, so and I'm not going to belabor the point anymore. But
Mark, don't forget that now our property taxes are not deductible. So that
but that's a problem everyone's facing. So I don't, I don't know how to
That's true.
Handicap something like that.
Well, let me try and bring us back together here, because does anybody have any more objectives we should be considering as part of what we should discuss in the town council besides what we've mentioned? I think I've got most of them written down here. Yes,
I
Maria.
have one recommendation, and that's from working on the budget throughout the years. I think that we should change the way in which we budget for paving and do it as pay as you go and take it out of the general budget, rather than bond it. I think we've gone over that hurdle of redoing all the roads and catching up from the bond years. So I think it's time we just put it in the budget as a 2.5 or whatever number that is, and pay as you go, so that we realize, what we're paying for rather than bonding it. We need to keep our capital expenditures with enough room to bond those projects that really need to be done. And that's one way of doing, because $5 million every other year, it's up.
That's interesting.
This is a good year to consider that, actually. I mean, given every road in town is ripped up and going to be repaved over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
That's a good input, Christina, and adding that to the general fund amount and some of these other items, monetize the assets that you guys have added. I think the 2 years ago, we started to stop bonding everything. I think if you bought a shovel, we bonded it. And we created a threshold. Correct me if I'm wrong, George. I think it was $25,000 or $50,000. And if it was less than that, we put it in the budget to make it pay as you go and not bond it.
Yeah, for this current budget year, yes.
Yeah, yep. So we're starting that idea, but we could even consider taking that further, Christina. Thanks.
Maria, your hand was up.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think we should consider, again, like we do every year, shared services, and maybe having kind of a committee that continues to study that, whether it's IT, HR, finance. Just maybe there's a way we can do, like during the COVID crisis where the cafeteria was actually cooking for Meals on Wheels. Like, is there something we could learn from what we're going through to try to share some kind of services and save money at the same time?
Can I increase the size of that? We've talked about shared services for years and nobody's ever gotten any traction. You can never get a hold of it. It's like trying to grab a beach ball.
Well, but I think part of it has become very emotional. It depends what bucket you're going to pick from. So I think it's time for the Board of Finance to get a consultant to come in and take a look at how we spend and where we can find cost savings, because internally, the advice that's given by those professionals is not taken seriously. So if we have to spend the money to get somebody from the outside to advise us, I think that's the way to go.
I think an objective we can add to this is to deal with shared services in this budget and either get on it or get off it, one or the other.
Yep.
But let's move on out. And I would, the other one that has always bothered me, which is similar to shared services, and that is some of the state mandates. A lot of them are in education, but a lot of them are in the town as well. We always bitch about it, but when you say to the town or the school board, please give me a list and how much is it for each one that you don't want to do, and as a mandate, and we would take it out of the budget, and that list never comes back.
True.
Right, and because we ought to push back on the state on stuff that's stupid, even if it's just stupid for us. And they have given us breaks on that in the past, right? I mean, look, we got out from under not being able to take the school budget down, right?
This is the climate to do it in.
It is. This is going to be a very hard year for budgets with COVID and everything else. Nobody has any idea where we're going to end up. So it's going to be very hard. And John, I think you and I are going to have to fight hard in order to keep money out of the general fund. It just seems to kind of collect there.
Do you guys have any comments with respect to the Board of Education?
I don't have any specific objectives for them. The thing that occurs to me is as we went through the last year, and it's one of the things, Tom, that you wrote in your note. When we went through last year and we cut their budget by $1 million, and it was viewed as we cut out transportation, when that was never the effect. That, I'll tell you, I voted to cut the $1 million, and that was not the reason I voted for it, was to cut transportation. It was to put pressure on the infrastructure in education, period. And so it's those kind of things that are very difficult. I mean, because you can only vote on one number, right?
Well, push on that a little further. Are you? It strikes me again that, and I've done again some other benchmarking. I think it's time. Maybe what we should do, if we're going to ask shared services and have internal audit review some things, and why wouldn't we ask the Board of Ed to come back with 3 scenarios by which they reduce spending 2%, 5%, 10%, ready to go over the next 3 years, and so just come up with scenarios. What would it mean now? And by the way, spare me. By the way, don't tell me the only option is to cut sports. There's just that's off the table, right? You just cut them. Just cut them. Well, COVID cut them. You didn't cut them. So I'd like to just ask them to do that. That's their homework assignment for us. It's always one way. Why not have a dialogue together as a town and just say, come up with some creative scenarios? There's got to be an opportunity. And I think that to your point on the one number, I'm okay with the one number. I'm not going to micromanage their budget, but I struggle with why it's gone, as you know, and you've seen the charts I've made, gone from 60 to 90, where the school population's been pretty much dead flat. Now we have a little bit of spike, we think, this year. Who knows? But anyway, that'd be just something I would ask the town council on their input. What do you think about making that request and getting them to come back with some real hard looks and some thinking, and have an open and honest dialogue about the art of what might be possible? As I said in our Board of Finance meeting, we're going to spend $1 billion in the next decade. $1 billion, this town, on education. I think that's amazing on the one hand. On the other hand, could we spend $950? I mean, is there a way to spend only $950 million? But that starts now with thinking of things that we might do. And anyway, I didn't mean to get on my
but
Todd, I think my issue with that is, again, it goes down to, you're buying a house, you have expectations around taxes. That one lump number doesn't mean anything to the average taxpayer, so long as they are. If I have a house and my $15,000 in taxes gets 3 kids through school, I don't care about $1 billion. I just got what I came in to do.
Yeah.
I hear you that, if we lump any 10-year number together, it looks really big. I don't see how. It's sort of like the mill rate. It's just a number that it creates more concern when it really shouldn't. That maybe that's the.
Yeah.
I need some clarification.
It's 62% of the budget. That's all. It's just 62%. We can not do anything. I'm just asking you guys, and if the answer is we don't want to do it.
I think it's good to look at what can you do to be more efficient and effective with the same dollar. I think that is again, going to the original points that we were making, I think that that's very fair. You know, again, setting this, but over on the top of that is, but you have to keep the services the same.
The quality has to be there, no question.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I don't know if 10% is a number I can envision, but you know, how do you do 2, 4, you know, 6? You know what I mean?
Or how could we take quality higher? I don't even know what's a 10, and where are we and what's a 10, and how would we get to 10, and what would that even mean? And how would we spend the same amount of money and put more of it in the classroom for the students so that we're a 10? I don't know, but I don't know that we ever ask ththose questions. But we should, you know, we're going to give out $90 million here, and I just asking. I don't know if there's other ways to look at it.
I'm going to say this, and it's just I'm going to wing it, but Maria's is the expert on this. But I think it's an example when Maria is taking this to FOIA regarding the curriculum and who sets the curriculum and who gets to decide, and having the option by statute that it should be the Board of Education that sets it. When you're not willing as a town to get into the nitty-gritty and the representatives are not there, then the administration is going to do whatever they want with curriculum that's going to keep increasing the budget. And you would be surprised how fast it increases when there are no stopgaps from the Board of Ed to tell them, no, we're not going to spend it on this, we're going to spend it on that. And that doesn't diminish the quality of education. It's just that it's like a free credit card. They can spend, and there's nobody watching the curriculum and the expenses that come from the decisions they make.
Are you talking about making curriculum decisions that don't want to be made by lay people? I want it to be done by the experts. If you're saying, can we be more efficient in how we offer curriculum, then, you know, I would agree with that statement. But I think what you're asking is, you know, we want town representation in the curriculum. I'm not sure how that impacts the budget. But
there's a difference between having the administration do the entire curriculum and make all the decisions, and having a member or 2 or 3 from the Board of Ed sitting at those meetings knowing what the cost associated with what they're proposing is. There's a big difference.
A little bit of transparency, I think, is what she's asking for.
Exactly.
Look, the law says the Board of Ed should vote on textbooks. It doesn't say they should write them. I mean, we spend $200,000 a year on textbooks. That's $1 million over 5 years. Transparency might say, you know, do we need transparency? Would let everyone know what choices are being made. Nobody ever said board members need to write curriculum. We're just supposed to oversee. Actually, the law is pretty clear. It says the board decides. But when you add a class, or you add 2 classes, or you add a program, they all come with a cost, and it accumulates over years.
I have a question.
Mark, I don't know if you're aware of this, but New Canaan Public Schools, when you get to the high school level, does not offer honor classes to any kid that wants to take it. And it does not offer AP classes to everybody that wants to take it. It's very selective on the kids that can and those that cannot take it. It's almost discriminative. So my point is, when you go to Darien, you go to Westport, you go to any other town, any kid can take any class they want. They can fail, but they can take the class.
Christina, this is not the board. I'm not on the Board of Ed, so
it's part of the curriculum decisions.
Okay, and, you know, not part of the town council job.
No, it's the Board of Ed's job, but apparently they're not doing it in public, so.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we have to approve a budget.
The reason I raised it wasn't any of that. I don't know enough about all that. I was just asking, 62% of the budget. Do we want to ask some creativity around either how to do more for the same amount of money or spend less? Or do we want to ask them anything? That's really the question. I don't have a preconceived notion. I just know we're going to spend $1 billion in 10 years. And I agree with you 100%, Mark. We want a phenomenal product. We've been saying that for 25 years, and we've got one. No one wants to do anything to mess that up. I just want to know if there's a different way to look. We want to look at everything else. I'm just saying that's 62% of the budget. I'm asking, should we look at that?
Well, it seems, Todd, just observing what's happened over the last several years, we get a ton of data. We all go through a ton of data, but yet there's a lot of people associated with this budget that are not convinced it's efficient or effective for the Board of Ed.
At the risk, Todd, I'm going to answer your question. I actually think at the risk of sounding like a Mark Jimsky ally here, I'm going to say that if the Board of Ed was sitting at this meeting, they would say that they have found, and they'd be right, that they have found cost savings in energy in order to be able to keep growing an excellent, developing new curriculum, developing an excellent program, that they have basically managed to a 2% growth number by finding massive savings in non-classroom lines, such as transportation, such as energy, and they plowed that into the classrooms. And they would sit here saying it's unrealistic for you to ask us to continue on that trajectory. We've already wrung those savings out of energy costs by switching to solar, to switching to natural gas, and that it's unfair for you to try and hold us to a 2% trajectory into the distant future. I think they would say that, and they might be right.
I think that collectively, a lot of people have helped find some savings there, no question about it. I guess the only question though is those energy costs aren't, I don't know proportionally, I don't have the budget book in front of me in terms of compared to the administrative costs. But there's, so again, I don't know. I'm just asking a general question. I have no preconceived notions. Is there something there?
And if they were to say that, I would say, you're right. We're not going to be able to look to energy costs to offset our increase in labor costs. So what is your plan for the next 5 years, 10 years in order to manage your labor costs so that we can continue to give an A+ product out there, knowing that our labor costs and our healthcare costs with the labor costs are rising at higher than inflation?
Yeah.
Again, I didn't even say the word mill rate, Mark.
Again, I don't know if it's an A+ product. I don't know. Maybe it's a B+, that's just great. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, could it be better for the same amount of money too? Because I think it's a great asset that we've got for the kind of town that's going to support that forever. It's going to be a big number over the next decade. That's all. That's why I put it out there. Not to talk about it seems ridiculous if we're going to talk about shovels and paving at $2 million, not talk about $90 million.
A way to, and then maybe the analogy is really with paving. And I think if you say, I want to know what it's going to look like if we hold you to a 2%, a 0%, or a -2, that sounds kind of stacked right up front. I'd actually like to know what it looks like at 0% growth, 2% growth. And what happens if we give you more money? Do you suddenly become the most outstanding school district?
My question. You answered my question.
In the country? Because maybe Mark and I would buy into that, and a whole lot of other people would buy into that too. For a very small incremental amount of money, they have a plan for a really big benefit. I would give them the chance to answer it that way too. That allows them to dream a bit. And I would actually support that. If they said, you know what, we'd be as good as Choate Rosemary Hall for a few lousy bucks. I'd say, oh, okay, what do they have that we don't have?
Exactly. Now you got my attention. That's right. I agree with that. I think we just ought to ask the broad question on we play the every year game. It just feels suboptimal at some level. Maybe that's the best way to run it, by the way. But if we're going to talk about guidance and guidelines and thinking about this differently, should we ask them the same questions?
Can I ask you a question?
Go for it, Tom.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, so I need some clarification. Take two extremes. In one extreme, you have the guidance process that lays out a percentage maximum on annual growth, and that's it, period. And then on the other extreme, you have a process that weighs a number of priorities, including a percentage growth target. In my perception, the Board of Finance began the year with the former and ended the year with the latter, and came out with what I thought was an excellent process because it balanced a number of priorities. It balanced great schools with, financial constraints, and came out with a solution that resulted in pretty much a flat mill rate. And yet, the other end of the extreme, only look at a number. To me, that's what happened with the town council. And we it's like we couldn't take yes for an answer. We continued to dig, and the only reason that I can perceive that, because I heard a lot of talk about COVID, but we didn't really impact the COVID risk to the town by what we did in our action. And so my question is, when we talk about all these various objectives, are these various objectives actually going to be taken into account in guidance? Or do we have guidance and then we have all these other objectives that are just something we discuss in a meeting with the operating bodies? What are we working toward here?
You asking the town council, or you asking the Board of Finance?
I think
Mostly-
he's asking the finance committee, and I think the finance committee is working toward a list of objectives we can transmit over to the Board of Finance.
Yeah.
So Rich, and next year, when we have to come to a final number, you would say, I want to weigh an active consideration of quality, efficiency, et cetera, with my financial target. You're not saying that you want an early communication take the example of the schools, to the Board of Ed, saying, you guys better manage your business to a 1.5% target net of benefits, or else. Which path do you want to follow, Rich?
Well, the objective that I would ask the budget to go out with is one that we thought was efficient and effective to the Board of Ed.
But it's a number. It's just a number.
It could be a number. It could be a range. It could be any way they wanted to send it out.
I just think the Board of Finance did a great job this year, and I think it was because you balanced a number of considerations. And I don't think that's what the town council did.
You bear in mind that what happened with the Board of Ed budget is we paid for this year by borrowing from next year, basically. It's going to come back to you in the next budget. You swapped $5 million subsidy last year that came out of the healthcare, and it can't be replicated. So this year it has to come back the other way. So this is what Michael was explaining at the beginning of the meeting. Right off the bat, your mill rate's going to be up. What's $5 million? 2 or 3 mills?
Yeah, maybe.
Right off the bat.
If we do
Well, I
nothing.
understand that, and I would remind you that we argued a lot about it last year, but I eventually caved into the concept that the financial guidance was going to be independent of benefit costs. So I would vote for you to take that approach this way again this year.
Exactly. And if you strip out the benefit costs, the Board of Ed budget came out at 4.5%.
Yeah, but
which was not guideline.
I know.
The only reason they met the guideline is because they mixed the two.
The guideline was 1.5.
Yeah.
And you approved something in the range of 3.4.
That's correct.
That's what you actually did.
Yes.
So I'm complimenting you on your process.
Well, and we appreciate that, Tom, but none of us felt good about it.
I just want to make sure we answer Chris's question, though, to the council. You're giving us input. We're looking for input here. Do you have guidance for the Board of Ed or input on the guidance?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking, well, you, Rich, and the town council. I think we're here to get insight and input on guidance from you guys. What is that insight or input regarding the Board of Ed budget?
Regarding the Board of Ed?
Yeah.
I don't know that we would give you the insight for the Board of Ed. I mean, we should figure out whether we want to do that or not. We don't really get to vote on it. We get to vote on the total number.
Well, guidance though around the number or the growth or the whatever it might be, or the approach. And if there's none, there's none. I just want to make sure we didn't miss that. If there's a guidance.
Yeah, well,
So Michael said that on a like-for-like basis, operating will be up 5.5. Michael, if I'm heard you correctly.
Between, hold on a second. I think it's 6% for Board of Ed, and it's with the town, it would be like 5%. But I think, let me just hold on a second. Let me just pull it up right now. It's 6.06. Would the Board of Ed's budget would be up 6.06% if you assume a 3% growth in operating expense.
Okay. And how much are they running?
So because of the health,
Got it.
they run about 3%. Last year, by the way, we approved a 3.94% operating expense growth. The target was 1.5%. So the Board of Ed did not make, like Tom said, the Board of Ed did not make our operating expense guidance of 1.5%. They were way over it, but we felt that we needed to give it to them. So we gave them 3.94% operating expense growth. Their overall growth was like less than 1% because of the healthcare savings. So the question is, if you give them a 3% operating expense growth, which is, I think, the going rate given the contracts and everything, you're going to be up 6% in the overall budget. And so the 6% can either be a higher mill rate, or we can take $5 million out of the general fund to reduce that cost. It's
Right.
the other.
Right.
You either charge the taxpayers more money, or you reduce your
which is really, maybe, I don't know, this will be my closing statement, but going back to what we started, and that was 3 years, because yeah, the number just doesn't look good 1 year, but if the town's fixated on that, then so be it. But if you look overall over 3 years, where have your taxes gone up significantly, and is the quality of your education the same? I mean, that's, that is more, that exemplifies 3 years than, I'm sorry, George.
No, I was just going to say, to Mike's point, that 3% generic increase in Board of Ed costs, that's going to be on top of the clawback we have to make for underreporting their health cost premiums this year. Right. So that was, I can't remember, Michael, what was that, $5 million?
I think it's about 3.
Okay, $3 million. So that $3 million is a permanent increase in their operating costs for this year, for next year, and the following year. So it does reinforce, Todd, and your point, Mark, that a 2 or 3 or 4 year perspective on what we expect from the operating entities is probably the only rational way to try to make sense out of that.
I think that's the way to look at it.
Yes, but you don't want to open the door that when they renegotiate the union contract, sky's the limit. So you're going to have to put some parameters around that, whether it's to freeze step increases, or whether you freeze hiring, whatever it is, you're going to have to stipulate something more that relates to that.
But that's one of the reasons to look forward 3 years, is what is the new contract going to be? And the fact of the matter is, if you took what the objective was that I laid out, which is it over 6 years, 3 back and 3 forward, it needs to be equal to inflation. And so this year you're up 5%. You were flat last year, and we get a new contract. I don't know when, next year or something. What can we afford in a new contract? And I'm willing to bet it's not a 3% increase.
Well, but also to stop or to freeze the step increases, that would have to be negotiated during the union contracts as well. And I think that sounding the bell early, saying that you want to freeze it, basically sets the mindset to accomplish it.
But that's why, I think you're right, Christine, and that's why I would suggest looking forward, because that says, what is my assumption for what the contract is? And does it fit the paradigm we're looking for here, which is we're growing with inflation? And if it doesn't fit the paradigm, if it fits the paradigm, it's fine. If it doesn't fit the paradigm, it says, well, we can afford a 1.5% pay increase. So how are you going to do it? I don't know if there's a step freeze or what we're going to do, or whether we're going to lay teachers off, or how you're going to get there. But I mean, this is exactly what Stanford hit last year. Is we can't afford what we're supposed to go do, so we laid 132 teachers off, right? And it'd be better to address it now than address it 2 years from now, when we've already been in the middle of the contract. What are we going to do given what we're setting up? Because we're setting up the next 2 years now.
Todd Lavieri, you asked about what we should get from the issues about the Board of Ed. This isn't a goal, but it would be awfully useful to know, and I think it may be doable to find this out, is what's the actual cost of labor for the functions, obviously the main one is teachers, in this area? What should we be measuring ourselves against? And I think that may be knowable. I think there's some databases out there that I haven't had a chance to dig into carefully, but I think that would be helpful to know. And we could ask the schools to generate that analysis.
Agree.
Well, so is your position on the Board of Ed, is the shared services a big piece? Is that what we're hearing today? Because you guys mentioned shared services. I want to make sure we heard it right. What is your thoughts about the shared services as a savings area?
I personally think that the shared services on facility maintenance with the Board of Ed and the town is necessary to realize savings on both ends.
I agree, and here's why. But I think it's secondary. I think it's important, but it's secondary. I think the most important thing from the taxpayer's point of view, you come into town and mill rate aside, you know, you're paying your 25 grand in taxes or whatever it is. You just don't want a lot of volatility. You want to pay 26 and then 27. You don't want, you know, big swings in your in the taxes, because when you move here, you make certain assumptions as to affordability of New Canaan. So I think the long-term planning of our budget is the most important thing. And I think that the shared services is the opportunity for the Board of Education and other departments in order to realize those goals in the long-term strategy. So if the long-term strategy is to grow at 3% a year, not more than, and you realize that your some of your costs are rising more than 3%, then you're going to have to look to shared services to make up the difference. You've already wrung everything out of energy. You're looking at shared transportation or other wringing it out of transportation. You're either going to have to cut labor, you're going to have to get serious about shared services. And like buildings, like moving out of your building and recovering your 300 grand in rent payments. So I don't start with shared services for shared services sake. I look at shared services as a result of needing to meet whatever our long-term trajectory looks like. And why do we have a long-term trajectory? I won't use the word mill rate. I'll say just because we're trying to take some of the volatility out of, you know, we don't want 16 to go to 18 to down to 14 to 20. I mean, you know, we want 25 to 26 to 27. And I say that because if I look back, our taxes were very volatile in New Canaan over the last 10 years. And it was really disruptive for a lot of families.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, John.
I think that the longer term planning is really the most important thing, and I think it's the most important thing because you can't make a year by year assessment without putting it into a context. Otherwise, you're doing what we're doing tonight. Oh God, it'll be 5% next year. Yeah, but you know what? It was 0 last year. And and when you put it in a 3-year context or a 6-year context, you get, well, it wasn't so bad the last 3 years. We really are at 2.5% for all 3 years. But look forward from where we are, and if we negotiate a 3.5% pay increase, we're cooked. We can't get back down to the inflation rate. So how are we going to deal with it? And we can start to deal with it by taking some expense cuts this year in anticipation of it, or decide we're not going to be able to do anything about it. We better get ready for this negotiation.
The way I look at it is, and I've said this repeatedly in our public sessions, our budget is, the operating budget is what, like 2/3 is wrapped up in our labor costs.
Right.
And, and I think other members of the town council agree, these departments really are, and I believe, are really at the bone in their operating budget outside the labor costs. We've had the discussion about the fire department and, the police and the Board of Ed. I think they really do look to be, very lean. So again, when we're looking to control costs in an overall objective, or at least consideration as we're moving again into another budget process, is the labor cost. That, if we can't find savings there, okay, we'll just continue to do what I've seen on the several budgets I've seen. It's just tinker around the edges with, pens, papers, and pencil, and not get the real savings that we need. So, and it's not, and look, it's not easy. I know it's not, I mean, for example, the Board of Ed, they're compared to all these other towns around us. So it's hard for the superintendent to negotiate a better deal, or,
we call it Cheap Charlie contract, because, you know, we're measured against these other towns. That's a tremendous challenge. It's a tremendous challenge for, you know, other departments too, when you're looking at all these comparators. So, you know, that to me is the biggest issue with our town budget is the costs on our labor. And without some kind of real effort on both the union side and the department side, and I'm not saying our departments don't put the effort in, but some new way of thinking moving forward, I just, you know, I'm not entirely optimistic that we'll achieve really any savings on the labor side. I just don't, you know, I mean, really it's either you're going to lay off, you know, convert, you know, maybe condense some positions if that's possible, and it very well may not be. But, you know, that I think is our probably our biggest challenge, because I'm honestly just tinkering on it around the edges is just not working.
Mike, is the attorney for the Board of Ed on a yearly contract?
I don't know. I mean, I've asked a while back to see the retainers for all of the council we use in town, not just related to the Board of Ed. And I would love to see that.
So my question is, I wonder if the town can force a rebidding of the legal counsel, only because we know that it's basically, I don't know what, I can't think of the appropriate word, but if every town is using the same attorney and every town is getting 3.5% increase, we're kind of blocked in and we can't get out from under.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the Board of Ed, you know, at least I've been told it's their choice who they use. So, you know, and I know from what I understand, they're comfortable with the current labor council. But I just am of the opinion I just wish it'd be more standalone consideration of the town, and not always be pinned in to the district reference group. I mean, that's just, you know, hurting us. And by the way, another thing too to consider, just going regarding the discussion on the general fund, you know, it's a difficult play for the town to make at the bargaining table to, you know, kind of plead poverty and things aren't great when we have, you know, almost 30 million, you know, sitting in a general fund somewhere. You know, if I'm the union, you know, negotiator, I would just say it's not a very credible argument for the town to put forward.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'll tell you right now, it doesn't matter. They'll negotiate just as hard in a district that has no money. It doesn't matter. It's not about that at all. It's really not I hear you. And let me just give you guys a couple of data points here. So just real quickly, Darien, and again, I have last year's fund balance. I don't exactly know how it panned out, but we're at 29 million. They're at 25 million. They're at 17% of their budget. We're at about 19%, at 29 and 152 million. Richfield's 11%. West End is 22%. Westport, so much higher than us. Westport is 15. Wilton's 18. We're right in the range of the other towns. So the amount of money we have in here as it relates to this is not why we have $7.7 billion of assets and $2.4 billion of income in our town. Mike, that is why you can't. Doesn't have to do anything to do with our fund balance. It's Canaan. That's why.
Todd, I hear you. I don't necessarily agree. I think
okay.
It's an entire package that they're looking at. So
of course, but
it's not dispositive, and I agree with you 100%. It's not dispositive of the issue. It's just something. It's in addition to the whole kind of totality that's reviewed during labor negotiations.
Yeah. But I just want to make sure there's no specific guidance you want to give us. These are all good ideas and thoughts around the Board of Ed, but there wasn't a specific number or target or anything that you're really shooting for. I like the idea on the shared services. I think we have to size the prize there. I don't know whether it's a $500,000 savings or a $2 million savings annually. I honestly don't know. I don't think any of us do. So we got to size the prize as to what's really out there. And I got that down. I think that's great to do.
I think what we got to do, Todd, is I think we got to consolidate our thoughts here.
Yeah. Okay.
And go back and talk with the finance committee, and then go talk with the town council as a whole.
Yeah.
And discuss what we might want to send over.
At the joint meeting last year, they said you put out a letter and you pick a number out of the air, and you didn't talk to us before you gave us you picked the number, and it's not based in reality. So what are we going to say when we repeat last year's process?
But they're not going to. They're going to talk to the Board of Ed.
I think Chris and Michael would disagree that it was picked out of the air. There is the amount of expense we want to have. It's the amount we want to raise by taxes to the taxpayers. It's a mill rate, which is an output. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into that. And oh, by the way, 62% of the number wasn't picked out of the air. That's a major driver. So if that goes up more than 1 or 2%, all the other calculus falls. So, anyway.
On top of that, to answer your question, John, I reached out to the Board of Ed last week to say, we want to have a conversation before we set budget guidance.
Yeah.
We want to hear your priorities, your needs before we do that. We're waiting for the Board of Ed to get back to us on when they want to talk to us about it. So the ball's
That's
in
what
their
I
court.
wanted to hear. That's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, we're on it. We're on it.
We're on it, and we're waiting for them.
Okay.
But John, I think the position we've been in for the last several years, which is by definition in the current year, all of the contracted costs are fixed, right? And we got to get into a position where we start to be able to operate on the total cost as opposed to just the variable cost above the current year contract. Because it doesn't work. You can't stay within the inflation thought at that level.
No, I understand. If we're not specific on it, it's hard for them. They have to do the hard things. And I think they don't, again, I always raise this as an example, and 12 vice principals for 5 schools. Is that really necessary? Are we going to be that much worse off with just 11 or 7? And so if we're not going to look at some of the admin costs, I don't think you can touch the classrooms. I think you got to look at the admin and maybe put more money in the classrooms. I don't know, but if we're not going to look at some of those structural things, I think to Mike's point, we're not going to make labor changes. They're going to have a union contract. The way to do it is maybe to flatten the organization a little bit. Those are the things that I just think we never talk about and we never hear any options on, and they're always dismissed, but there's money there again. And maybe we don't save it. Maybe we put it in other parts of the school. I don't know.
Maria?
Rich, in Norwalk, I was just reading, they offered 91 city employees early retirement, an option to retire early as a cost savings measure. So I was just thinking, as part of the long-term plan for the Board of Ed and, with a contract coming up, that might be something, I don't know how much it could save, but the idea is that you're offering retirement to the highest paid employees or administrators, and you're bringing in others, and it's a win for everyone. It costs something, but might be something to think about, especially if we're doing a long-term plan. You can look at down the road, 3 years down the road.
George and Chris, I think you've got, or we know historically we've had some turnover. And I heard 12 retirements back in early September. Already, and so there will be some turnover this year, Marie. I'm sure. Again, I don't know what it is. We'll see.
Yep.
It usually
But there'll be turnover without actually trying to buy it, right? And I think Maria's point is maybe there's an effective way to buy it and have it paid out of the pension fund.
Right. I understand.
Yeah, I don't think you can't pay the incentive to induce someone to retire early out of the pension fund. That's got to come out of the operating. So that's
it might be worth
that would be an incremental cost that would have to be borne either by the general fund or by the taxpayers.
Keep in mind, the only thing I would say to this group, and I think those are all things that ought to be looked at, but some of these towns and cities, Stanford is another one, someone else raised, they're in dire straits financially. They have a huge revenue hole in their budget. Our revenue is driven by, taxpayers, taxes on their homes. We don't have that as much revenue coming in on the commercial side. So we're watching the revenue side very carefully, but we're not projecting a major hole in our budget that we have to fill like they are. And of course, they're at a different scale altogether.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think that I don't think we're going to get any new ideas in here. I'd like to pull them together and just send them back out to the Finance Committee. And see what we think we would like to take to the town council 2 weeks from now.
Okay. Well, like I said, we've got some good homework assignments here on some benchmarks, some things you were looking at around financial responsibility. Kevin really has plans to monetize assets. It's a slow process, but it is happening. Some of it, has to be done carefully and not so public under certain circumstances. But there are also other things you asked for, and on the general fund, we'll have our facts and other competitive information for you, so you have full data on how you can assess and analyze where you think we ought to be, and we may agree or we may disagree or we may agree to disagree. I don't know.
Yep.
I appreciate the input.
Okay.
And you should know. I mean, I don't have the exact number. I wrote it down. I'll get it from Linda. 4.5 million give back to taxpayers this year. I think it was 3.5 last year. I'm saying it's 2 to 3 a year. It's probably $12 million over the last 5 years. So it isn't an insignificant amount, and it's because of underspending, earning more than we thought, the 1%, all those sorts of things. So it's very important. I think we're aligned on the concept, maybe just not on the exact dollars.
Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Good. Okay, adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time and your thoughts.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you guys from the Board of Finance.
Board of Finance, yeah.
Alrighty.